This is my book, Frostbike, The Joy, Pain, and Numbness of Winter Cycling. It set out to answer a very basic question: is riding your bike in winter a viable way of getting around a city? This book came out in the winter of 2014, which means it's the 10th anniversary of this book, and the occasion has got me thinking about those 10 years and how far we've come. And so today, this video is about 10 ways that winter cycling is better today than it was 10 years ago, and maybe a few challenges that have emerged in those 10 years. Number one, bikes are better for winter now. When I was researching this book, I went to northern Finland to the city called Oulu for the first ever Winter Cycling Congress. And when I was there was this American whose name now escapes me, who arrived with this machine that I had heard about but had never actually seen. It was a fat bike. Now, the Finns thought this bike was hilariously American, like with those giant tires. They thought it was like a Hummer or a Cybertruck or something like that. But the bike did have a really big impact on our perceptions of winter cycling. Now today, fat bikes are probably not the most popular winter bike for bike commuting or getting around a city, but they did do an important thing, and that was change people's perceptions of winter riding. It showed people that riding a bike in winter is not a crazy thing, that it is something that you can do that is fun and productive. That was a huge mindset change, and I would argue that the fat bike paved the way for all kinds of improvements to all kinds of different bikes to make them more resistant to all seasons, including the winter. Including this bike behind me. Now, this thing is nowhere near a fat bike. It is a Priority Continuum Onyx from my great sponsor for this channel. It's got a belt drive rather than a chain that won't rust. It's aluminum frame so it won't rust. It's got internal gears so don't get all gummed up with winter slush and snow and sleet. The point here is that there are options available now, and 10 years ago I found it really difficult to find a great winter bike. So I would say bikes are better for winter now than they were 10 years ago. See what I mean? Those guys who just passed, they were riding fat bikes. I feel like 10 years ago, they probably wouldn't have been riding in winter at all. Number two, winter clothing is better. I want to read you a little snippet from this gem of a book called Secrets of Warmth for Comfort and Survival by Hal Weiss. This book came out way back in 1988. Here's something he wrote. It is now possible for outdoor travelers to be protected from being drenched in an unexpected squall. Skiers are now able to sit in snow-covered chairlift without getting their behinds soaked and frozen. Runners are also no longer at the mercy of the elements, since they can have one garment to protect them from both wind and rain. The garment he was talking about is Gore-Tex. Now, back in 1988, for people who love to get outside, Gore-Tex was a revelation. It was waterproof and windproof, and people thought it was revolutionary. Today, Gore-Tex and all kinds of different materials are available. There's been so much innovation in outdoor clothing in the last 15, 20 years. It's been pretty amazing. New fabrics, new technologies, all of this has helped get outside and stay comfortable much better than it was 10 years ago when I wrote my book. And it's not just that the gear is better. In the last 10 years, in certain places, like I would say, I'm thinking about you, Western Canada, the Pacific Northwest of the US, and maybe Germany, outdoor gear became really fashionable. People wear outdoor stuff because they want to look outdoorsy, whether they get outdoors that much or not. And the popularization of outdoor gear has meant that there's all kinds of variety. There's so much diversity in it now. There's so many options. It's just way easier to get decent quality outdoor gear at a decent price. Sometimes I would say it's still overpriced in lots of cases, but you can get good outdoor gear in much more varieties, much more fashionably than you could 10 years ago. And that has been a huge boon for winter cycling. Number three, gear is better now. This is a mitten. This is a bike tire. This is a bike helmet. These are three examples of things that, yeah, they existed 10 years ago, but they weren't really intended for winter cycling. And today they are. These bar mitts and similar versions called pogies that are intended for one thing. They have one job, and that is keeping your hands warm on the handlebars of your bike. These are everywhere now. They're easily attainable, and they're really good quality these days. The bike tire is full of studs. This is absolutely intended to ride in winter. Now, studded bike tires have been around for decades, but today they are more widely available, they're better quality, and they're more affordable than they were 10 years ago. And this helmet has a giant light in the back. Staying lit in winter is really important. And I remember 10 years ago having to take this big handlebar light off my bike every night and charging it indoors. Today, with the LED technology and the way it's advanced, bike lights are everywhere. They're easy, they last a long time. You can go days without charging them. You can even fit them into things like helmets. So is cycling gear better for winter today? Absolutely. Number four, e-bikes. Now, I could just say the word e-bikes and leave it there, but there are a couple of things specifically that I find have made winter riding much easier because of e-bikes. So riding in winter tends to be a little bit tougher than riding in the summer. Studded tires and fat tires have more drag, so you have to pedal a little bit harder. Cold weather can also make it tougher for your body to put out the energy. Layering up in layers of clothing also just feels like it's a bit more work just to move your body in the way you do on a bike. E-bikes make all of this a little bit easier just by taking some of that burden off of you. And secondly, and this may sound counterintuitive, but e-bikes help keep you cool. I find one of the hardest things in riding in winter when you layer up and you start pedaling and your internal engine starts going is you heat up really quickly and you start to sweat. And if you don't have a shower at your destination or you get caught out in the cold, that sweat can be a nuisance or downright dangerous. E-bikes can help because, again, they take some of that burden off of your body, but also they can maybe get you going a little bit faster, and then that cold air whooshing around your body can remove some of that body heat and keep you a little bit cool and maybe prevent you from sweating a little bit. Number 5, winter is no longer weird, mostly. When I first started winter cycling, I got all kinds of comments from people who saying that you must be crazy to ride your bike in winter. At first, I kind of liked this because it made me feel sort of special and tough. But in researching my book and visiting cities like Oulu in Finland and even Copenhagen and seeing families and kids and retirees all happily riding through winter made me realize that you don't have to be tough. Riding in winter is more about a city that enables it through bike lanes and good plowing. It's more about preparation and having a good attitude. A decade later, I'm happy to say that I get much fewer comments today about being crazy. I think it's much more common to see people riding in winter. I think everybody knows somebody who rides a bike in winter, at least here where I live. That being said, I wouldn't say winter cycling has been normalized as much as I thought it might be by now, or at least as much as I hoped it would be. This varies, of course, from city to city, but one of the things I wrote about in the book was the need to get over this idea that you had to be some kind of crazy masochist to ride a bike in winter. So if you ride your bike in winter, I'd say you're probably still a bit of an anomaly depending on the city you're in, but it's much less than it was 10 years ago. Number 6, snow clearing of bike lanes is no longer a novelty. See this? This is a nicely cleared multi-use pathway. Now there's a story in my book about a time in the past when people who wanted to ride their bikes in winter couldn't because the pathways were not plowed, and so they started doing it themselves. They actually rigged up things to their bikes to help clear the snow off the pathways, and they rode. They did such a good job that one year we had this giant unexpected spring snowstorm, and it was just too much for these volunteers to handle. And subsequently, City Hall got flooded with people complaining that the bike lanes weren't plowed, and the city's response was, "What are you talking about? We don't plow pathways." All that uproar led to a policy change, and today I'm happy to say that our city does a pretty good job of keeping hundreds of kilometers of multi-use pathways clear in winter for both cyclists and people out for a walk. And this is a big part of what makes winter cycling possible here in Calgary. I don't know what it's like in your city, but getting from the point where the city says plowing pathways is not our problem to an expectation that city policy keeps those pathways clear is a pretty huge step. And without it, there are a lot of days in the winter that I could not ride my bike at all. Number 7, there are great winter bike communities out there. One of the reasons I wrote Frostbike in the first place is because I was looking for resources on riding in winter, and it was really tough to find them. This is something that has absolutely changed in the past 10 years. In most winter cities, there are now great communities of passionate bike people who love to share. There are also great online groups of people who are willing to share, including the shifter community, who is just full of helpful people who want to help you get out there and enjoy winter. There are international conferences, online forums, social media channels, all of it helping you get on your bike in the winter, and it's fantastic. I'm not even exaggerating. Winter cycling has totally changed my attitude towards winter and made it a more positive part of my life. I went from hating and dreading winter to like really embracing it and enjoying it. And I think a lot of people who ride their bikes in winter would say the same, and they want to share. So you should be able to find a community out there that will welcome you in. Number 8, winter bike share. In many cities, bike sharing systems have become an integral part of daily life. And in the bad old days, however, that integral part of life often shut down for the winter. But what we're seeing now is more and more cities keeping their bike shares alive in winter. Even in cities with serious winter like Montreal, the Bixi bike share system is now operating year-round. And you can see amazing things like studded tires on some of these bikes. That's a pretty big development for those who rely on Bixi to get around for their daily life. I also think as more cities keep their bike share systems open longer, this is an acknowledgement that bike share systems are not for fun, they're not for recreation, they're an integral part of the transportation system of a city, and we need to keep them available to people as much as possible. That is a huge positive change. Number 9, more bike lanes. Now, the most important part of winter cycling is probably not the bike or the gear or the clothing you wear, it's probably the presence of bike lanes in your city. And while this isn't the case everywhere, and there has been some backsliding in some places, I think more and more cities definitely have more bike lanes today than they did 10 years ago. Not only does this make cycling more viable for people in the summertime, it absolutely makes it more viable in the winter as well. I like to think the arc of urban transportation history bends towards bikes, and I think that's applying in winter as well. Number 10, the appeal to ignorance is getting weaker. So this is one of those common logical fallacies that used to crop up all the time when I was researching Frostbike, and it goes something like this: hey, why should we spend money building bike lanes in a winter city because nobody rides a bike in winter? And I think the past 10 years has really weakened this argument because it's so obvious that people will ride a bike in winter now. The number of people who ride in winter tends to rise proportionately with the number of people who ride in summer. This tells me that it isn't just a hardcore group of crazy people who ride in winter. It means that if biking is made easier and safer in the summertime and the wintertime, more people will ride. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say this argument is completely gone. There was actually a boring boomer opinion column written in my local newspaper this week making this argument. But I would say the argument is just getting weaker and weaker because there is so much evidence now that it becomes obvious. Okay, there are 10 reasons that winter cycling is better and easier now than it was 10 years ago. But now I want to point out 3 things that are still a barrier to winter cycling. Number 1 is society's attitude towards winter remains pretty negative. Almost every depiction you see on television, in advertising, or in movies, with the exception of Hallmark Christmas movies, winter is negative. Winter is seen as a burden. It's seen as a barrier to be overcome. It's seen as something that wants to kill you. Very rarely do we see people out happily enjoying winter. Maybe my biggest pet peeve is winter weather and traffic reports. They just make winter seem so scary all of the time. Like, for example, the way we talk about wind chill in weather reports sounds like a horror movie sometimes. I mean, it just sounds so absolutely scary when they say the temperature is -5, but -40 with the wind chill. I understand we don't want people to be put at risk, but we very rarely take the time to educate people on how to stay warm, how to layer up, how to stay out of the wind, how to move from place to place safely and comfortably in winter. Instead, I worry that we use it to scare people, and therefore they never get outside, and therefore they tend to hate winter. I feel very lucky that winter cycling helps me maintain that positive attitude, but I wish we would make it easier for people to overcome that barrier. Barrier number 2, riding in winter often seems like a privilege and not a right. In many cities, the maintenance of bike routes in winter feels very tenuous. Like, if everything is going well, the city will do us a favor and clear those bike routes. But as soon as there's a heavy snowfall or conditions get tough, it feels like all those resources are redistributed into plowing roads for automobiles. It feels like the city is treating bike routes as a gift that they are giving cyclists and not a right that we have to be able to get around in the city in the way we want. But if we want people to ride their bikes in winter, we need bike lanes to be reliable and they need to be resilient. They need to be a right and not a privilege, in the same way that motorists, transit users, and even pedestrians have a right to get around all year. Barrier number 3, winter is changing. My last point here is, yes, it's about the fact that the climate seems to be changing. And if you're thoughtful about this and get past the stupid idea that, oh, global warming means winter will be warmer, you realize that that means that winter is becoming more unpredictable. Here in my city, for example, we had the longest, mildest autumn that I can remember, and it was glorious. But then we also had a record snowfall really early in the season, and it's taken weeks for city crews to catch up on the plowing. This is not normal. And not normal seems to be happening everywhere. Winter is just getting more unpredictable. And with that unpredictability, it makes it harder as individuals to plan and prepare for getting out on our bikes. It makes it harder for cities to budget for and to prepare for and to plow for. It's just harder for everything all around. And unfortunately, I don't know that this will be changing anytime soon. So the unpredictability of winter is just going to make things tougher for everybody. Well, there you go. That was kind of fun for me to revisit 10 years of winter cycling. I'm surprised how much stuff from 10 years ago is still relevant today. And that's not because I did anything special in writing that book. It's just that riding your bike in winter are like universal human experiences, and it doesn't change all that much. So I hope my book can be helpful to you. I hope this channel can be helpful to you. I love riding my bike all year round. Yes, even in winter. I'd love to see more of you out there doing it as well. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.